Hey guys, Argifantes here with another Prismata game analysis. Today I bring you a game I played against Crash Overlord to use as stock footage for my Prismata in 60 seconds video. As it turns out, the game was actually really good, and I felt like it deserved its own video. So here it is. The theme of the game is going to be on rebuilding, and what I mean by that is, occasionally you'll end up in these sort of situations where both you and your opponent wipe out each other's stuff. So all you're left with is a couple drones and maybe a unit here or there, and you have to sort of reset, rebuild your economy, and continue on the game. In this sort of situations, it's really important to pause and figure out what your advantages and disadvantages are. It's never going to be like the start of the game. Usually there's some amount of imbalance, and you just have to identify what those imbalances are and how you're going to win the game from that position. And usually these games happen with Tia Thernax or another dynamic unit like that, where like one player isn't quite able to finish off the other player and Tia Thernax runs out of charges. But in this particular case, it actually happens because of Antima Comet and Deadeye Operative. As the game starts, I go for Third Engineer because there's nothing too aggressive in the set. There's no damage to really back up the Frostbite. But my opponent, seeing that, decides to try to punish me with Deadeye Operative. So I sort of had a plan for this. I was just going to go Antima if he decided to go Deadeye, especially with Frostbite backup. And that's basically what happens. And my opponent actually makes a very interesting choice here. He realized that it'd be very difficult to defend the Frostbite plus Antima rush. I could have gotten out 3 Frostbites if I really wanted to. So rather than trying, he just lets me breach. He says, okay, you can breach, but I'm still going to be in a good position, even after the breach. And that's pretty much what happens. I freeze the 2 engineers here because I realized I would not be buying damage for the next couple turns, so the Frostbites are actually best used just to snipe drones. And I do manage to wipe out most of his Deadeyes, but very crucially, he built the Deadeye on the turn I was breaching, so I couldn't actually kill his Deadeye, and that's very important in this game. We end up in a situation where he's actually ahead slightly on econ, and he has a Deadeye, whereas I just have a wall of engineers that aren't going to do anything for a long time. In this sort of position, I believe my opponent is actually quite a bit ahead, and I'm end up having to play catch up here. So let's just pause and look at the situation. My opponent has more drones than me. He also has the Deadeye to kill my drones, so I can't actually just rush Tarsiers or rush Feral Wardens or something. Because I only have something like 9 drones, and Deadeye kills a drone a turn, he'll actually be able to wipe out my drones before I'm able to breach and wipe out his Deadeye Operative. So just bum rushing him won't work. Which means my only option in this situation is actually just to continue droning. Even though he's wiping out 1 drone, I'm still able to kind of outpace him by buying 3 drones a turn. And this is one of the turning points of the game where things actually start getting better. I realized the game would be going on quite a bit longer, and I realized that my opponent will always have a drone advantage. So I need to carve out an advantage in some other way, and in this case, it's actually going to be with the Gauss Fab. So usually Gauss Fabricator is not a great unit because it's just too slow. However, in this particular game, Gauss Fab is actually amazing because the game will be going on for quite a bit, and neither player really has any attack at this point. My opponent, seeing this, decides to start building attack finally. He goes double Steel Splitter. Rather than going for Animus or something like that, Steel Splitter is just kind of slightly more efficient in the short term because he can get it off the tech he already has. And at this point, I'm clearly behind on drone. He has 15, I have 10. But I realized if I were to start just going like Tarsiers now, I still would probably lose the game because his Deadeye Operatives will kill too much of my econ and I would just be unable to defend his Steel Splitters. So I actually spent another turn just droning up. This just gives me buffer room against his Deadeye Operative. Now I have 13 drones, which means it's going to take him 3 more turns to get me down to turn 10 drones. But at this point, I do start building attack. Again, the only way I can gain an advantage in this game is if I have more attack than my opponent. I cannot afford to let my opponent have both more econ and more attack, and also a way to kill my econ. So I briefly considered doing walls or something like that, but I actually go for the most aggressive option, which is Feral Warden. A double Feral Warden lets me assemble 4 damage next turn, and also they kind of act as walls. Even though it's not real absorb, you can kind of end up in a position where you just cycle the Feral Wardens. Right? He kills, he does 2 damage to the Feral Warden, but at that point the Feral Warden just becomes a Tarsier, and you just replace the Feral Warden. So it's kind of like you have a wall every single turn, and you're also simultaneously building damage. Obviously, if he breaches with the Steel Splitters, the 1 damage Feral Wardens do become a liability. But this is really the only way, or I should say the fastest way for me to assemble damage. And it's very, very important that I build damage faster than my opponent. Right? At this point in the game, I'm doing 7, my opponent's also threatening 7. We have the same amount of damage, but as we see, eventually I'll start to pull ahead on the damage count due to the fact that I have the Gauss Fab. This is just one of the most efficient ways of building damage in the game. It's just usually too slow, but in this particular game, it really shows how useful it can be. So in this position, he's forced to buy at least an Aegis every single turn, or a wall, or something like that. So we're both building like 1 point of damage each turn. He builds Steel Splitter, I build Feral Warden. But very crucially, I have access to Frostbite, and also like a combination of Gauss Cannon and Feral Warden. So I'm actually building 2 damage a turn, whereas he is only building 1. And it actually gets to the point where he can't build any more damage. And it's very important that he's stuck on 7 damage. If he had something like 10 damage, I would have no way to defend it with only 8 drones, especially with the dice killing my drones every single turn. But because I was able to actually assemble 13 damage in this case and 3 points of freeze, I forced my opponent to build Polywall Aegis this turn rather than building more Steel Splitters. And as we see here, because I was forced to buy the wall here, I just built the Frostbite as damage, as pressure really. My opponent is just unable to buy more damage. So even though he has slightly more, well, not slightly more, even though he has double my econ, I still force him in a situation where he has to defend. And here I pop my Frostbites. There's no real good way for my opponent to defend, so he decided to just let me breach him. I finally am able to kill his Deadeye Operative and some number of drones. And this is the point of the game where I was like, okay, I think I'm ahead. I think I'm going to win the game. Right? Even though he still has double my amount of drones, what ends up happening is he just can't buy more attack. And I'm still able to barely defend 7 every turn using some combination of force fields and walls. And eventually I just grind him out. He's forced to force field now every turn, and eventually just can't defend. So, and yeah, Gauss Fab really showed its worth. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I'll see you guys next week.